The last two topics for blood vessels are what we call the special circulations. The first one has to do with the liver. It's known as the hepatic portal circulation. And to best understand this circulation, we need to understand where this blood is coming from. So the hepatic portal circulation is a set of veins. So this is venous blood, deoxygenated blood, that comes from the GI tract, but also the spleen um, and pancreas. And this blood, if you think about blood leaving the GI tract, it will have picked up nutrients. So when you ingest, digest, and absorb nutrients from your food, those nutrients enter the bloodstream, or at least most of the nutrients do. This blood is therefore going to be rich in nutrients. It might also contain other things from your diet, like toxins or medications. So instead of draining this venous blood rich in nutrients back to the heart, like all other veins do, there's a detour through the liver. And this detour is known as the hepatic portal circulation. So you'll notice in this drawing, we are looking all at these veins. We've got veins from the lower GI, eventually leading to what would be the inferior mesenteric vein. We've got veins from the upper GI going via the superior mesenteric vein. We've got a vein coming over from the spleen, so this would be the splenic vein. Those veins, instead of going right back to the heart in the right atrium, are going to form what's known as the hepatic portal vein and bring this blood into the liver. And the idea is we need to look over this blood. We need to process this blood. We need to do something with all these nutrients. We need to do something with maybe the toxins that are found in our foods. So the liver processes this blood before it goes back to the heart. Because once it goes back to the heart, it's going to be pumped throughout the body. So we have the veins that merge to form the portal vein. They are the inferior mesenteric, the superior mesenteric, and the splenic vein. So those three veins actually merge together to form the hepatic portal vein. I want to emphasize this is much different than veins we're going to call the hepatic veins. This is the hepatic portal vein. It goes into the bottom of the liver. Once this blood enters the liver, it goes into the capillaries of the liver, which are a type of sinusoid capillary. And this blood is actually going to mix with the oxygenated blood that's going to the liver from the hepatic artery. But while this blood mixes, the liver cells are going to detoxify the blood, and we're also going to process a lot of these nutrients. Once this blood has been processed, it can leave the liver, and blood leaves the liver in what's known as the hepatic veins, which then go to the inferior vena cava. So notice there is a major difference between the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic veins. So let's think about what the liver does to this blood. One thing it does is it stores and modifies nutrients. An example we've heard of. We've heard that glucose can be stored in the liver. So if you eat a meal that's rich in glucose, a lot of that glucose we don't want to send immediately throughout the body. So it'll go into the liver, and the liver will store this glucose as glycogen. So that's one way the liver is processing this blood. The liver will detoxify harmful substances. So it might take alcohol and detoxify it. It might take other toxins that are found in the environment that might end up in our food. So it helps protect us from certain things that we might be consuming. It may metabolize certain drugs. One example is nitroglycerin. So if you were to take nitroglycerin orally, that drug would be completely metabolized by the liver and it wouldn't work. Nitroglycerin is a very potent vasodilator, and if someone is experiencing a heart attack, we can dilate the coronary arteries in hopes to get proper blood flow to the heart. This drug has to be given another method. So it's usually given under the tongue, and the drug will enter circulation that way. The liver is also known to convert prodrugs into the active form of the drug. For example, we can design drugs that aren't active until they go to the liver, and then the liver basically will turn that drug on. Codeine, if you've ever heard of codeine, it's a very common analgesic, pain reliever, but it actually gets converted into morphine by the liver. The liver also removes bilirubin from the body in the form of bile. So remember that you've got this spleen over here removing red blood cells, and that heme is going to be metabolized. It's sent across this splenic vein to the portal vein to go to the liver. So now the liver can remove that bilirubin by putting it in bile. And there's the gallbladder right there. So now that bile can deliver into the small intestine that waste product, that bilirubin. So these are all the different things that the liver does in order to kind of process this blood that's coming from your GI tract. The next special circulation is fetal circulation. So the idea here is a developing fetus doesn't have functional lungs, so how do we oxygenate the blood? Doesn't have functional kidneys, so how do we get rid of waste? And it doesn't have a functional GI tract, so how does it get nutrients? And I think we all know one of the answers is the placenta. So the placenta allows the fetus to exchange with maternal blood. So the exchange of materials between the fetus and the mother occurs through the placenta. So we're just going to look at how do we get blood from the placenta to the fetus, and then how do we get blood from the fetus back to the placenta. So that's called fetal circulation. So how do we attach the baby to the placenta? That's done using the umbilical cord. So we've probably heard of an umbilical cord. That umbilical cord is basically a conduit between the fetus and the placenta. And that umbilical cord contains normally 3 blood vessels. We're going to see in a moment it contains 1 umbilical vein and 2 umbilical arteries. So how do we get blood flowing from the placenta to the fetus? That is done using the umbilical vein. So here is a placenta. There's capillaries, there's fetal capillaries and maternal capillaries in that placenta. I want you to keep your eye on the red blood vessel, because the red blood vessel is going to be the umbilical vein that's going to be transporting oxygenated blood with nutrients towards the fetus. So that's why it's a vein. It's going towards the fetal heart. That umbilical vein is going to change its name a little bit once it enters the fetus. But that's how we get oxygenated, nutrient blood to the fetus. Then the question is, how do we get blood back to the placenta? Well, that's done using 2 umbilical arteries. And these 2 umbilical arteries are going to come off of the fetal internal iliac arteries. And since there's 2 fetal internal iliac arteries, there's 2 umbilical arteries that go back to the placenta. So inside that umbilical cord, you will find two umbilical arteries delivering blood from the fetus to the placenta, and one umbilical vein going from the placenta to the fetus. So that's how we make this circulation between the placenta and the fetus. This drawing is probably the best one to see this circulation. And we basically start at the placenta. Here's this placenta, which has a lot of blood vessels, a lot of fetal capillaries and maternal capillaries. If we follow the umbilical vein, it would be in the umbilical cord here. Here's the umbilical button, if you will, and that's where that umbilical vein enters the fetus. It actually travels through the liver, where it's known as the ductus venosus, but that eventually attaches to the inferior vena cava. So this is where this fetus is going to be really picking up this oxygenated blood. The problem is, we know the inferior vena cava goes to the right atrium and not the left atrium. So how do we get oxygenated blood into the left side of the heart? Well, there is a hole for some of this oxygenated blood to pass from the right atrium over to the left atrium. And we already learned that hole as the foramen ovale. That's going to allow some oxygenated blood to be on the left side of the heart. So when the left side of the heart's sending that blood systemically, we have oxygen. I'll point out the ductus venosus as well. That's a fetal blood vessel. And then that allows some blood to be shunted away from the lungs. Since these lungs are not oxygenating blood, we don't need to send much blood to them. But once you've got blood on the left side, it goes through the fetus via systemic arteries, and eventually those umbilical arteries will come off of the internal iliac arteries and send that blood back to the placenta. So that connects the circuit, if you will. So the most important things of this would be to know exactly what the umbilical vein is, know exactly where it eventually goes, which is the inferior vena cava, and where do these umbilical arteries come from? They come from the fetal internal iliac arteries. A number of these blood vessels are temporary, so if they're no longer necessary, they become ligaments. So this view here is after birth, when these things close up and become remnants of these structures. A number of them become ligaments. The umbilical arteries become ligaments. The umbilical vein becomes a ligament. The ductus venosus becomes a ligament. And the foramen ovale becomes a fossa ovalis. It closes. And we already know that this ductus arteriosus becomes the ligamentum arteriosum. So this is what we would call fetal circulation. It's a special circuit that's used in order for the fetus to obtain its oxygen, its nutrients, and to get rid of its waste.